On July 17, 1984, Karl Wolff died in a hospital in Rosenheim, Bavaria, at the age of 84. He was buried in the small cemetery of Prien am Chiemsee, his grave marked only by a simple stone bearing his name, his dates, and the title General Retired. No mention of the SS. No reference to his years as Heinrich Himmler's right-hand man. No acknowledgement of the hundreds of thousands of Jews transported to their deaths under his coordination. When his daughter Helga, who had converted to Islam and taken the name Fatima, recited Muslim prayers at his graveside, she marked the end of a life lived in contradiction. The man who had orchestrated the deportation of Jews was now being laid to rest according to a faith he had reportedly embraced in his final weeks. But what happened to the family he left behind? From the privilege of Himmler's inner circle to the uncertainty of post-war Germany and beyond, the Wolff family's story reveals how the children of perpetrators navigate a world that will never forget their father's crimes. Karl Friedrich Otto Wolff was born on May 13, 1900 in Darmstadt, the son of a wealthy district court judge who affectionately called him Karel, a nickname that stayed with him throughout his life. He grew up in comfortable circumstances, educated at a local Catholic school despite being raised agnostically. When World War I erupted, the 16-year-old Wolff enlisted in the Imperial German Army, underwent 4 months of military training, and volunteered to serve on the Western Front in September 1917. He proved himself capable under fire, rising to the rank of lieutenant by the age of 17, one of the youngest officers ever commissioned in the German military. He received the Iron Cross, both first and second class, for his service. The end of the war brought upheaval. Wolff was demobilized in 1920 as the Treaty of Versailles forced the reduction of the German armed forces. He joined the Hessian Freikorps, serving in the paramilitary unit until May 1920, and then began a banking apprenticeship at the Bethmann Bank in Frankfurt. In August 1923, he married Frieda von Rohmheld, and the couple moved to Munich, where Wolff worked for Deutsche Bank. The economic instability of the Weimar Republic proved challenging. He was laid off in 1924 and briefly worked for a public relations firm before starting his own advertising company in 1925. The business struggled through the economic crisis of the early 1930s, and Wolff, like many Germans of his class and background, began looking to more radical political movements for answers. In October 1931, Wolff joined the Nazi Party and the SS. His membership number was 695,131 in the party and 14,235 in the SS. The story goes that when he first tried to join the Sturmabteilung, the SA brownshirts, someone told him that a big blonde fellow like him should join the SS. Wolff took the advice. He later recalled the oath on his enrollment form. He said he undertook to commit himself to the idea of Adolf Hitler, to maintain strictest party discipline, and to carry out the orders of the Reichsführer of the Schutzstaffeln and the party leadership conscientiously. It was a commitment that would define the rest of his life. Wolff's rise in the SS was rapid and remarkable. His background, education, and polished manners set him apart from many early Nazi recruits. After the party came to power in 1933, he served briefly as an adjutant to Franz Ritter von Epp, the governor of Bavaria. In June 1933, Heinrich Himmler personally recruited Wolff to head the office of the Reichsführer's personal staff. Historians have debated why Himmler chose him. Some suggest Himmler wanted someone who could impress senior officers in the German army. Others point to Wolff's connections with bankers and industrialists. Whatever the reason, the appointment transformed Wolff from a struggling businessman into one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. By 1937, Wolff had risen to the rank of SS Gruppenführer, considered third in command of the entire SS after Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. He managed Himmler's affairs with the Nazi Party, state agencies, and personnel. He oversaw the economic investments made by the SS, maintained connections with the organizations Ahnenerbe and Lebensborn, and coordinated all contact and correspondence within the SS at both party and state levels. The eloquent, well-mannered Wolff became what historian Peter Padfield called the other face of the SS, reassuringly reasonable, intelligent but realistic, socially ultra-acceptable. While Heinrich represented the cold, calculating ruthlessness of the organization, Wolff embodied its aspirations to aristocratic respectability. As World War II began, Wolff remained at Himmler's side, serving as his chief of staff and liaison to Hitler's headquarters. In this position, he had access to all information passing across Himmler's desk. He received copies of all letters from SS officers. His friends included Odilo Globoknik, who would organize Operation Reinhard, the program responsible for the extermination camps at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. When the mass deportations of Jews to death camps required coordination with the Reich Ministry of Transport, it was Wolff who handled the logistics. On August 13, 1942, he sent a letter expressing his particular pleasure that trains were running daily to Treblinka with 5,000 members of the chosen people. This letter would later become central evidence in his trial. May 1945. The Third Reich had collapsed and its leaders were being hunted across a devastated Europe. Karl Wolff found himself in a remarkably different position than most of his SS colleagues. As Supreme SS and police leader in Italy since September 1943, he had spent the final months of the war conducting secret negotiations with Allen Dulles of the American Office of Strategic Services. The negotiations, code-named Operation Sunrise, aimed to arrange the early surrender of German forces in Italy. Wolff had initiated contact through intermediaries in Switzerland, meeting secretly with Dulles in Zurich on March 8, 1945, and in Ascona on March 19, 1945. The talks were fraught with complications. Wolff had originally hoped to allow Army Group C to withdraw through the Brenner Pass to continue fighting the Soviets, but Dulles insisted on unconditional surrender. When news of the negotiations reached Stalin, the Soviet leader exploded in paranoid rage, accusing the Western Allies of maneuvering behind his back. Hitler, upon learning of secret contacts with the enemy, would have had Wolff shot. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, initially sympathetic, was transferred back to Germany, and his successor, General Heinrich von Vietinghoff, proved reluctant to surrender. Italian partisans captured Wolff on April 26, 1945, but he was rescued by Dulles's Office of Strategic Services and Swiss intelligence. Finally, on April 29, 1945, surrender documents were signed at Allied headquarters in Caserta. The actual surrender became effective on May 2, 1945, 6 days before the general German capitulation. For Wolff, this surrender was not an act of moral awakening, but a calculated gamble. He hoped that delivering an early peace in one theatre would shield him from the reckoning he knew was coming. In a handwritten letter to Dulles after the death of President Roosevelt, Wolff made his intentions clear. He asked Dulles to rehabilitate his name, to publicize his true humane intentions, and to protect his two families, meaning his first and second wives and their children. In the immediate aftermath of the Italian surrender, Wolff and his entourage were not treated as prisoners, but as valuable assets. They remained at a villa in Bolzano, celebrating their accomplishment with Allied officers, drinking champagne and dining well. Gero von Schulze-Gevenitz, Dulles's aide, even appeared in photographs that seemed to depict a relaxed, happy gathering of friends. US Army trucks arrived on the 13th of May, Wolff's 45th birthday, to formally take him and his staff into custody. SS officers had donned their dress uniforms, Wolff favouring an elegant off-white tunic that looked far less threatening than the standard black SS outfit, and opened bottles of champagne before the military police arrived. Wolff was brought to a prisoner of war camp at Gmunden, Austria, where American authorities gave him extraordinary privileges. Though technically under arrest, he was allowed the run of the camp. His beautiful blonde wife, Ingeborg, and their children were permitted to join him. The Americans supplied him with liquor, cigarettes, and food from the post exchange. They even brought in his private yacht for pleasure cruises on the lake. Brigadier General Edwin Howard, the camp commander, reportedly said, "The Nazis couldn't have been all that bad if they had generals like Wolff." At Gmunden, Wolff became one of the Allies' most successful interrogators. By alternately threatening and charming fellow prisoner generals, he extracted information that American intelligence found valuable. His aristocratic manner, his apparent reasonableness, his willingness to cooperate all worked in his favour. To his American captors, he seemed like the white sheep of the dreaded SS, a man who had risked his life to end the war early. For Wolff's family, these early months represented a surreal transitional period. His second wife, Ingeborg Countess von Bernstorff, whom he had married in March 1943 after divorcing his first wife Frida, had endured the final chaotic weeks of the war, wondering if she would see her husband again. Ingeborg had been born Ingeborg Maria Christensen in Hamburg on February 2nd, 1904. She had been widowed when her first husband, Count Heinrich Eduard Eberhard von Bernstorff, died, leaving her with a son. During her affair with Wolff, she had given birth to another son, Widukind, who was fathered by him. Widukind's very name reflected the Teutonic mythology that Wolff and the SS had embraced, drawn from the Saxon warrior chieftain who had resisted Charlemagne. When the family reunited at Gmunden, they lived in a strange bubble, prisoners in name, yet enjoying comforts that ordinary Germans, scrambling for food in bombed-out cities, could scarcely imagine. Meanwhile, Wolff's first wife, Frida von Rohmheld, remained in Bavaria with their 4 children. The divorce in March 1943 had been bitter and prolonged. Frida had initially refused to agree to the separation, even writing to Himmler himself to plead for support. The Reichsführer SS, who considered the family sacred to the SS ethos, had initially sided with her. Divorce was frowned upon for SS officers, and Himmler had denied Wolff permission to end his marriage. But Wolff had gone over Himmler's head, obtaining permission directly from Hitler on March 6, 1943. Just 3 days later, on March 9, 1943, he married Ingeborg at Hohenlochen. The reason for Wolff's determination to remarry was coldly practical. Frida was dark-haired and brown-eyed, and so were their children. Wolff's mistress Ingeborg was tall, blonde, and teutonically reserved, the physical ideal of the Nazi racial fantasy. By divorcing Frida and marrying Ingeborg, Wolff believed he was improving his standing within the Nazi hierarchy, aligning his family's appearance with the regime's racial ideology. It would be much better for his future, he reasoned, if he had a blonde wife who could give him blonde children. After the divorce, Frida settled in Rottach-Egern on the Tegernsee in Bavaria, where she remained just after the war. She had 4 children to raise alone: 3 daughters, Irene, born in 1930, Dora and Helga, born in 1934, plus 1 son, Thorisman, born on January 14, 1936, though his informal name was Karl Heinz. The naming ceremony for Thorisman had taken place on January 4, 1937, when the child was almost 1 year old. The event had been designed according to SS pseudo-pagan rituals by Karl Maria Weisthor, an SS mystic who advised Himmler on matters of Germanic tradition. Reinhard Heydrich, an SS Sturmbannführer, Karl Diebitsch, served as godparents. Heinrich Himmler himself had blessed the child. The ceremony was recorded on a typewritten certificate and reflected the bizarre religious pretensions of the SS leadership. Now, in the aftermath of the Reich's collapse, these children carried names and histories that marked them as products of the Nazi elite, even as they tried to build normal lives in a devastated Germany. At Nuremberg, Wolff escaped prosecution. His role in Operation Sunrise had made him valuable to the Americans, who considered him an asset rather than a defendant. Instead of standing trial alongside his former colleagues, Wolff served as a prosecution witness. He testified about the inner workings of the SS, provided information about other Nazi leaders, and cooperated with interrogators who found him charming, articulate, and supremely helpful. The tall, aristocratic general, with his impeccable manners and apparent reasonableness, seemed to embody a different kind of SS officer, cultured, educated, civilized. This impression served him well. When the trials concluded, Wolff was released in 1947, believing his wartime service had been forgiven. The denazification process, however, still applied to him. In November 1948, a German court in Hamburg sentenced Wolff to 4 years in prison for his membership in the SS. By the time the sentence was handed down, he had already served most of that period while awaiting trial. In June 1949, he was released after his sentence was reduced. He returned to civilian life and moved to Starnberg near Munich, where he settled with Ingeborg and began working as an advertising executive for an illustrated magazine. The skills that had made him useful to Himmler, his charm, his connections, and his ability to navigate complex social situations, now served him in the business world. He was rebuilding the career he had pursued before joining the Nazi Party. For the next decade, Karl Wolff lived quietly and comfortably. He resided in a lakeside villa near Munich with his second wife. His children from both marriages grew up in a Germany that was desperately trying to forget its recent past. Irene eventually married a man named Holt. Dora married someone named Mass. Helga married and took the name Heeren. Thorisman carried his unusual Germanic name through a society eager to move on from the mythology it represented. West German society in the 1950s was focused on reconstruction, on the economic miracle, on looking forward rather than backward. Many former Nazis slipped back into professional and social life with remarkable ease, and Wolff was no exception. Then, in 1961, everything changed. Adolf Eichmann was captured in Argentina and brought to Israel to stand trial for his role in the Holocaust. The trial captivated the world and produced new evidence about the machinery of genocide. Among the documents presented was correspondence that directly implicated Karl Wolff in the deportation of Jews to death camps. The August 1942 letter, in which he wrote that he took particular pleasure in the trains to Treblinka, surfaced as damning evidence. During the trial, Eichmann reportedly referred to Wolff as one of the salon officers who had facilitated the final solution while maintaining an air of civilized detachment. On a wintry day in January 1962, two plainclothes policemen knocked on the door of Wolff's lakeside Munich villa and arrested him. The charge was aiding and abetting murder in at least 300,000 instances. For the first time since the war, Karl Wolff would face a German court for his role in the Holocaust. He was held in Strafanstalt München-Stadelheim while awaiting trial. The trial began in the summer of 1964 at Munich's Palace of Justice. For 11 weeks, prosecutors presented evidence that Wolff had served as Himmler's eyes and ears in Hitler's headquarters, that he had coordinated the logistics of deportation, and that he had maintained correspondence with Odilo Globoknik, the organizer of Operation Reinhardt. The prosecution argued that Wolff, as chief of Himmler's personal staff, had received copies of all letters from SS officers and would have been aware of the final solution at every stage of its implementation. They noted that in August 1941, Wolff and Himmler had observed a mass execution near Minsk, organized by Arthur Niebuhr. According to Wolff's own later testimony, Himmler had become increasingly distressed during the shooting, his face turning almost green as he watched the executions, before throwing up. Yet neither man had stopped the killing. Wolff defended himself with the same charm and apparent reasonableness that had impressed his American captors 2 decades earlier. He insisted that he had known nothing about the true purpose of the deportations, that he believed Jews were being resettled on reservations, and that the phrase movement of population in his letters proved his ignorance of their actual fate. When confronted with the letter expressing his particular pleasure about trains to Treblinka, he claimed he had merely signed it after a cursory glance without actually reading its contents. He asserted he had never been a Jew hater of any kind, and had even helped some Jews escape with false papers. He presented himself as a bureaucrat who had processed paperwork without understanding what it meant, a cog in a machine too vast for any individual to comprehend. He even claimed that Adolf Eichmann had once challenged him to a duel after Wolff demanded the release of a Jewish protégé. According to Wolff, when the small SS Lieutenant Eichmann refused to release the man, a quarrel developed in which Wolff showered him with insults. The story seemed designed to portray Wolff as someone who had opposed the worst excesses of the regime while serving at its highest levels. The court did not believe him. On the 30th of September 1964, Chief Judge Emil Manhart took 3 hours to read the verdict. Wolff was found guilty of being an accessory to the murder of at least 300,000 Jews deported to Treblinka, as well as the deportation of Italian Jews to Auschwitz and the massacre of civilians in Belarus. He was continuously engaged and was deeply entangled in guilt, the judge declared. Himmler found in him his bureaucrat of death. The sentence was 15 years in prison at Strobing, with loss of civil rights for 10 years. The court noted that the penalty was softened in view of his otherwise blameless life and his role in ending the war in Italy early. For Wolff's family, the trial was a public ordeal. His children, now adults, watched as their father's crimes were documented in excruciating detail. The newspapers described how he had observed mass executions alongside Himmler, how he had facilitated the transport of hundreds of thousands to their deaths, and how he had maintained close relationships with the architects of genocide while claiming ignorance of their work. The image of the cultured, reasonable general gave way to something far more troubling. A man who had been intimately involved in the Holocaust while maintaining the polished veneer of civilized respectability. Both the defense and prosecution appealed. The defense sought acquittal, and the prosecution demanded life imprisonment. In October 1965, the German High Court rejected both appeals, and the sentence stood. Wolff remained at Straubing prison to serve his term, but he would not serve the full 15 years. In 1971, after suffering a heart attack, he was released on health grounds at the age of 71. His civil rights were fully restored that same year. He had served roughly 7 years for his role in the deaths of 300,000 people, a sentence that averaged to less than 1 second per victim. After his release, Wolff retired to Austria, where he lived quietly for a time. His marriage to Ingeborg had deteriorated during his imprisonment, and the couple separated in 1969, though they remained formally married. Ingeborg moved to Switzerland, settling in Grabs in Canton St. Gallen. She died there on December 7, 1983, at the age of 79, just 7 months before her husband. But in the late 1970s, Wolff emerged from obscurity to become an unexpected public figure. As one of the few surviving high-ranking SS generals, he was sought out by historians, documentary filmmakers, and journalists seeking first-hand accounts of the Third Reich. He appeared in several television documentaries, including the landmark British series The World at War in 1973. On camera, he spoke about his years at Himmler's side, about observing executions in Minsk, about the internal workings of the SS. He described the splatter of brains on Himmler's coat during the Minsk execution. He lectured to historical and academic groups, offering versions of his experiences that emphasized his claimed ignorance of the regime's worst crimes, while positioning himself as a valuable witness to history. During this period, Wolff became entangled with journalist Gerd Heidemann, a Nazi enthusiast who had purchased Hermann Göring's yacht Karin II and cultivated relationships with former SS officials. Heidemann had a 5-year affair with Edda Göring, Hermann Göring's daughter, and entertained former Nazi generals on the yacht, including Wolff and Wilhelm Mohnke. Throughout the 1970s and the 1980s, Heidemann located and interviewed numerous former Nazi officials in both Germany and South America, with Wolff serving as his liaison. In 1979, Wolff traveled with Heidemann to South America, where they tracked down and interviewed fugitive Nazis, including Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Leon, and Walter Rauff, who had developed the mobile gas vans used in the Holocaust. Recently discovered audio tapes from a 1979 meeting between Wolff and Barbie, now held at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, reveal 2 aging war criminals openly discussing their actions during the Nazi period. The recordings show them reminiscing about their service, unburdened by guilt, connected by shared memories of a regime they had both served faithfully. These tapes, along with hundreds of recorded interviews from Heidemann's collection, provide chilling documentation of how former perpetrators viewed their past. When Heidemann claimed to have discovered Hitler's personal diaries in 1983, Wolff served as a consultant, helping to authenticate what he believed were genuine historical documents. The diaries were forgeries created by small-time criminal Konrad Kujau. Stern magazine paid 9.3 million Deutschmarks for 60 volumes that turned out to be written on modern paper with bindings and ink dated after the 1950s. When the fraud was exposed, Wolff was too ill to attend the subsequent trial, and he died the following year, still maintaining that he had believed the diaries were authentic. Perhaps the most remarkable chapter in the Wolff family's post-war story involves his daughter Helga. Born on the 25th of July, 1934 to Wolff and his first wife Frieda, Helga Lily Wolff grew up in the inner circle of the Nazi elite. Her brother Thorismund's baptism had been conducted according to SS rituals, with Heinrich himself as a godfather. She had known no world other than the one created by her father's allegiance to Hitler and Himmler. In 1960, Helga converted to Islam in the Munich apartment of Ibrahim Gakaoglu. She took the name Fatima, and in 1962 married a Czech Muslim named Omar Abdul Aziz, moving to Czechoslovakia. 3 years later, she returned to Germany with her husband and became involved in the Munich Muslim community. The couple divorced in 1983, and on the 1st of April 1984, just months before her father's death, She married the widowed German convert Abdul Karim Grimm and moved to Hamburg. Her conversion represented a profound break from her family's history. She later explained that she had been searching for a way to come to terms with her family's fraught past, seeking a spiritual framework that could help her understand her place in a world still shadowed by her father's crimes. Over the following decades, she became one of Germany's most prominent Muslim public figures. She wrote and translated numerous books on Islam, contributed articles to the magazine Al-Islam, and served as its editor for several years. She sat on the advisory board of the Central Council of Muslims in Germany and was a member of the German Muslim League in Hamburg and the Liberal Islamic Federation. As a journalist, she devoted herself mainly to issues such as education and the role of women in Islam. What made Fatima Grimm's story particularly remarkable was how directly it engaged with her father's legacy. Karl Wolff had served a regime built on racial hierarchy and religious persecution. He had facilitated the murder of Jews by the hundreds of thousands. Yet his daughter had chosen to embrace a faith that many Nazis had viewed with contempt, building a life defined by spiritual values radically opposed to those of the Third Reich. In print, in person, and on the air, she shared her worldview with the good manners she had learned from her father, but the message she carried was entirely her own. A few weeks before his death in 1984, Karl Wolff reportedly made the Islamic profession of faith, following his daughter's lead. Representatives from the Islamic Center of Munich attended his funeral, where Fatima recited Muslim prayers at his grave. The circumstances of this conversion remain unclear. Some accounts suggest it was a genuine spiritual transformation at the end of his life. Others view it as a final act of reinvention by a man who had spent decades reshaping his public image. The piece of rough-hewn rock over his grave in Prien, Chiemsee is neither Christian nor Muslim, bearing only his name, dates, and the title General Retired, as if Wolff wanted to be remembered as an officer who served his country rather than as the bureaucrat of death that the Munich court had declared him to be. The other children from Wolff's first marriage followed quieter paths. Irene married a man named Holt. Dora married someone named Mass. Thorisman, the son whose naming ceremony had been designed by SS mystics and attended by Heinrich, carried his unusual name through life. Little public information exists about them, suggesting they chose obscurity over engagement with their family's history. Wolff's son from his second marriage, Widukind, has similarly remained largely out of public view. Fatima Grimm died on the 6th of May 2013 in Hamburg at the age of 78. She left behind a legacy that stood in stark contrast to her father's. She had spent decades writing about Islam, educating German audiences about her faith, and building bridges between communities. The girl who had grown up in the shadow of Himmler and Heinrich became a voice for religious understanding in a country still grappling with its past. The Wolff family story illuminates the complicated ways that perpetrator families navigated the post-war world. Unlike some Nazi descendants who publicly confronted their family histories, most of Wolff's children chose silence. Only Helga, through her conversion to Islam and her public role as Fatima Grimm, explicitly engaged with the weight of her inheritance. Her choice to embrace a faith persecuted by the regime her father served represented a kind of reckoning, though not a direct confrontation. She never publicly denounced her father or expressed remorse for his crimes. Instead, she built a life that implicitly rejected the values he had served, finding meaning in a spiritual tradition that emphasized submission to God rather than racial domination. Karl Wolff himself never acknowledged genuine guilt. Throughout his trial, in his later interviews, and reportedly to the end of his life, he maintained that he had been ignorant of the genocide he helped facilitate. He constructed a narrative in which he was always adjacent to evil, but never complicit, a bystander who happened to occupy one of the most powerful positions in the SS apparatus. The charm and apparent reasonableness that had served him throughout his career continued to shield him from full accountability, even as the documentary record made clear his deep involvement in the machinery of mass murder. Wolff's case also illustrates the failures of post-war justice. A man who had coordinated the deportation of 300,000 Jews to their deaths served less than 10 years in total imprisonment, including time awaiting trial. He was released early on health grounds and spent his final years as a minor celebrity, interviewed by historians and filmmakers eager for first-hand accounts of the Third Reich. The early surrender in Italy, motivated entirely by self-interest, had earned him protection that lasted for nearly 2 decades, allowing him to live comfortably while his victims' families mourned their dead. When he emerged in his later years to lecture about the SS, he presented himself as a witness to history rather than one of its perpetrators. The question of how to judge Karl Wolff's family remains complex. His children did not choose their father. They did not select the names that connected them to Nazi mythology or the godparents who represented the regime's leadership. They grew up in a world where their father's position meant privilege and protection, and they emerged into a post-war reality where that same position meant stigma and suspicion. Some, like Fatima, found ways to construct identities that implicitly repudiated their inheritance. Others chose anonymity, building lives far from public scrutiny. Together, their stories illuminate the long legacy that Nazism cast across generations, reaching far beyond 1945 and continuing to shape the lives of those who inherited its burden. If you found this video insightful, watch what happened to Heinrich Himmler's family after World War II next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more historic weirdos. Thanks for watching.